Hello and welcome to Upfront on JoyNews. So over the last 3 weeks, some African countries affected by COVID-19 have resorted to partial lockdown to contain the spread of the virus. In Ghana, the lockdown, as we know, has been extended by a week, with some calling on government to extend it to the whole country. But even as we discuss the need to expand it to the whole country, the World Bank says Africa must not lock down the European way, mainly as a result of the fact that majority of its workforce being in the formal sector. In Nigeria, we're told of how the governor of Ekiti plans to give stipends, particularly to the self-employed, having opened its food bank. And then in South Africa, well, the proposal is to make economic activities possible with measures in place to manage health risk associated with these activities. In effect, relax some of the measures and manage infections in very controlled manner while protecting the poor. This is Upfront, and today we're discussing achieving a lockdown that works for Africa. We ask the question, why reinvent the wheel when we have a system that works elsewhere, particularly in Europe and Asia? How unique is Africa's situation to warrant a new approach, and what should be contained in that approach? We'll be joined by two persons, but we'll start off with Janisha Patel, who is with the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. She'll be joining us shortly. Yes, she's actually joined us. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Great. We certainly would come back to you, but we've also been joined by Dr. Nimoy Thompson, who is an economist and former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Nimoy Thompson.
Thank you for having me on the program.
My name is Winston Amwa. We'll go for a short break. When we return, we'll get into our discussions. This is Upfront. All right, so welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is Upfront, and we've been joined by Janisha Patel and Dr. Nimoy Thompson. Janisha Patel, all the way from Cape Town in South Africa. She'll be helping us to understand the South African situation, because we're told in South Africa, Janisha, that it is projected that some 370,000 people will be losing their jobs, with the economy projected to also contract about some 6%, with deficit rising to 12%. But our focus today is on the informal sector. Help us understand how this is impacting the informal sector in South Africa, as in the lockdown.
Okay, thanks for having me. So over here in South Africa, we're moving into our third week of lockdown. And I think that some of the biggest losses that we're going to see are going to come from the informal sector. The informal sector in South Africa is about 25 to 30% of the economy. So that's quite a bit smaller than the average in the rest of Africa, which is around 60%. Although I think that what we're already seeing is that the informal sector is facing threats to their food insecurity. They don't have a lot of savings, and I think that this poses a threat to social cohesion. And I think what the real concern is that the government is unable to reach the informal sector with any relief efforts. There's no sort of formal way to get relief into the informal sector. And, research institutes and think labs are looking at options like using the existing cash grant system, and specifically the child support grant system, to deliver relief to the informal sector, because they estimate that about 40% of people who receive a child support grant also live with someone who works in the informal sector.
Okay.
But this plan is hugely flawed in itself still, because that's still 60% of informal workers are not going to be able to receive any form of relief.
And I think as we look at the impact on the informal sector, are there any plans to mitigate the negative impact on the informal sector? The World Bank has talked about how we cannot go, as in Africa, cannot lock down the same way as Europe is doing. And I've seen articles written by South Africans, urging government to consider the current lockdown and probably allow people to go about their work as they try to, mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. How far is the government considering, or how big is this conversation in South Africa, and what are the national responses, particularly from government?
I certainly think that there is indication that the government is trying to figure out how they can open up the economy in a way that will still keep people safe from the virus. I think especially the informal sector and informal settlements, which are highly dense areas, there are very few safeguards for people to sort of stay safe from the virus. There's very little space to social distance. There isn't, always access to things like clean water and sanitation. So these are massive concerns that do need to be addressed moving forward, because even once the lockdown ends, the coronavirus isn't going anywhere. And there needs to be safeguards put in place to keep people in the informal sector, sort of reduce the exposure to contracting the virus. And I think that what we're seeing here in South Africa is a lot of solidarity. There are a lot of community action networks which are delivering assistance to the informal sector, but I don't think it's enough, and I don't think it's sustainable. And so something needs to come from the top, from the government, in terms of relief for the informal sector. But because there's no existing infrastructure, this might take up to 2 months to get in place. And until then, the informal sector will face huge shortfalls in cash, which is already devaluing as we speak, and are at risk of taking up loans from unaccredited loan dealers, plunging them further into debt, and having to pay very high interest rates, sometimes 30% on their loans.
Okay.
So I think that there's going to have to be some intervention to make credit available.
All right, so let me get to...
I think that there needs to be some collaboration from the private sector as well.
Okay, so let me get to Dr. Nimoy Thompson. Let's look at the Ghanaian situation also. So we know what the situation is in South Africa. Dr. Nimoy Thompson, so let's look at the Ghanaian situation. Look at how it's impacting the Ghanaian informal sector. I mean, looking at the partial lockdown that we're experiencing currently, Dr. Thompson.
Sure, thank you very much. I think in the case of Ghana, it's probably even more severe than it is in South Africa, for the simple reason that we have a much bigger informal sector, in excess of 70% than South Africa does. But of course, despite the size of the informal sector, ultimately human lives are at stake, and so we need to consider that. But the dynamics in terms of Ghana is that in the past, when we faced economic challenges, it was the informal sector that actually absorbed the fallout from the formal sector. So when companies closed down or scaled back or whatever, and unemployment resulted, it was always the informal sector that took in these excess labor. Now, for the first time ever in our history, that sector itself has been shut down. And so it's a total... of course, there are parts of the country that are not directly, I emphasize the word directly, on the lockdown. But even those that are not directly on the lockdown, indirectly on their own, they've kind of imposed some lockdown. So for all practical purposes, the entire country is under lockdown. The question then is, can we continue to hide this wave from the virus? And the answer obviously is no. So we need to begin to contemplate an exit strategy.
Exactly. We'll look at that strategy, but before we look at that strategy, Dr. Thompson, let's look at those that we've put in place currently. So there's been lots of announcements, some measures for SMEs. There's also been tax holidays. Well, these are for the formal sector, but at least you've also seen that government is helping, some 40 million cedis being allocated to provide food for certain households. Now, if you analyze government policies put in place so far, would you say these policies are enough to actually mitigate the challenges that informal sector faces around this time?
Obviously not, because we don't even have the administrative data to even extend the necessary relief to those most vulnerable in the informal sector. And so you've seen the chaos that has characterized the distribution of food, for example, which is perhaps likely to increase the risk of infection and spreading it at a much faster rate than would have been. So what that means is that we need to find more imaginative ways of targeting people. We already have poverty mapping data at the Ghana Statistical Service. We may want to tap on it, but more specifically, don't forget that the government has already used mobile phone subscription from Vodafone to kind of track movement just before and after the lockdown was put in place. We may want to consider extending that, the use of mobile phones. So for example, instead of having these apps that don't really work, we can create an app for people to go on there and register themselves that they need assistance. And with that, we can do the proper analysis and maybe try and align them with existing poverty mapping data. And from that, you'll then be able to do some sort of a spatial targeting
but
that will help
the challenge there, Dr. Thompson, the challenge there is, okay, so people should go out there and register themselves. You've talked about how we should go about it.
No, not go out there. If you have a mobile phone,
yes, so people should actually use their mobile phone and let us know their current condition. But the issue is, how do we verify that they are poor people?
That's what I'm getting to. In a crisis situation, there are two set of criteria. One is effectiveness, attaining the results, and efficiency, doing that at a positive. At this point, we don't have the data. This is the best we can do. And I didn't even finish what I was saying. So after individuals self-register, we then prescribe the safety protocols. So for example, it's easy. We all should have some piece of cloth that we can tie around our heads, over our noses or whatever, as a way of promoting these protocols or social distancing and all that. Again, this is not the ideal solution, but I'm moving from a situation where there's a complete chaos now. We don't know where people are coming from. If everybody's registered and you use the app properly, you can identify the number of people in a particular area who would qualify for food assistance Monday or Tuesday or Thursday, and therefore prepare the number of meals according to that. Yes, there may be a few people who will try and take advantage of the system, but we shouldn't use that to kind of negate the larger objective. That's one. Two, in terms of cooking, I've heard people complaining. We already have boarding schools that are closed. The boarding schools have facilities for cooking already. Is it possible for us to bring in some of the cooks that work at these boarding schools for them to cook at various places? Again, these are novel or innovative solutions to a problem that we have never experienced before. And once you identify them, let's say you have 100,000 people registered, you know that out of the 100,000, 20,000 would show up at the Mile 7 Park on Wednesday. And therefore you prepare maybe 21,000 meals for that. And the condition is that everybody who's coming there should have a piece of cloth tied over their nose as part of the social.
So let's look at, if we do this properly. You talked about the fact that if we're to do the app registration properly, what would constitute doing it properly?
That's what I'm saying, that first of all, it's the easiest. The government has already, in case you're not aware of that, the government used only Vodafone subscribers to try and identify movement of people just before and after the lockdown. So what that tells us is that there's some potential there. Now, given what we've seen so far, where people simply show up in their numbers without any structure or whatever, I'm saying that let individuals, once we develop the app, I would sit in my home and register. And we can then verify that data with existing data at the Ghana Statistical Service on poverty mapping that we already have. Now, is this 100% reliable? No. Even in situations are countries where they have complete data on the citizens. There's always room for exploitation or abuse. So I'm not under any illusion that this is going to be a perfect thing. But in my view, it will help manage the kind of chaos that we are seeing now, where you don't know the number of people who are going to show up. In this case, if you're registered 100,000 people, at least you know what kind of budget you're going to have for the next month for 100,000 people. And out of the 100,000, you then split it in terms of the number of days, the days that they should show up. Not everybody's going to show up. So they show up once the app verifies. You show up, you have maybe a piece of cloth, but nobody will show up without having a face mask of some kind, okay. Either the standard face mask or piece of cloth or something like that. We need to enforce some discipline also. Okay. So you show up, you mention your telephone number, it's verified on the app. We know that on Tuesday, 20,000 people show up at Mile 7 Park. On Wednesday, 15,000 will show up at Ashraman. On Thursday, and on and on and on. It helps to bring some sanity and structure, and therefore also help us to manage the kind of risks that we are facing now, where I saw the video for Circle, and the one for Kumasi, where there's complete chaos. That to me is unacceptable. But anything to help minimize the risk and ultimately manage it, to me, is better.
So
and
how about...
we already have I'm sorry?
How about using our local government systems? And so we know that in every electoral area you have assembly members, you also have unit committee members. Now, they live with the people. How about using them to identify the vulnerable and, using them as also the intermediaries to have food distributed to these persons?
That to me was still, it's certainly an option to be considered. But you are now sending individuals to move around. That itself is a cost, an additional cost. The easier approach is for the individual to sit in their homes. Vast majority of Ghanaians already own telephone and mobile phones, including people that we consider vulnerable. You see the Kaya, almost every Kaya I see has a mobile phone. And all they have to do is to access this thing and do the registration in 5 minutes. Why do you want to send individuals out there going from door to door and out there, when it's much more cumbersome and perhaps even more expensive, when someone can register in less than 5 minutes? And don't forget, after the registration, and we have to develop the app in such a way that the data can actually be analyzed and compared to existing information that we already have on spatial poverty, where poverty is concentrated. Of course, there'll be overlaps. In fact, when somebody registers, it's either male or female. Are you a mother? Are you pregnant? All these things will give us refined information for targeting the best we could under the circumstances. I'm not an advocate of sending people out there. The second you involve individuals going from door to door, and then there's a temptation for someone to say, well, give me money before I put your name on the list and all that, you begin to corrupt the system. But if individuals in the privacy of their own homes can register, and then you use that number, again, I'm emphasizing, if they register and you have 100,000 people registered, it helps you as the government to plan and to finance that plan. Currently, we don't know. So you hear that,
so
20,000 people.
So currently, we're told that we're actually giving food, we're feeding 400,000. That's according to the Gender, Children and Social Protection Ministry. The Deputy Finance Minister has also said some time ago that they're estimating to feed some 1 million people within the Greater Accra metropolitan area and the Greater Kumasi metropolitan area. But let's look at, you talked about how Ghana's informal sector was very large. And so government has come up with certain measures. You've talked about it not being adequate, not being enough. But beyond what government has done, the next important thing is to find out whether the Ghanaian economy can actually support more. Can the Ghanaian economy support more reliefs or maybe stimulus packages for the informal sector?
Certainly. It also depends on who gets what. I hope the usual politics that we play in this country doesn't come in, and that deserving enterprises will receive the necessary aid irrespective of their political coloration. This has always been a problem in this country. But ultimately, the two sectors are linked. The welfare of the formal sector has kind of a backward linkage to the formal sector, and sometimes even the reverse. So we need to look at both. Of course, in the case of the informal sector, statistics and data are very rare. And so even as we come, earlier you were saying that we have to talk about an exit strategy later on. But if and when you get to that, that will be part of the exit strategy. There will have to be a phase, a period of relief for people in the informal sector. There may be those who can go back to work right away and be okay. But you may have those who have also lost income, probably have gotten sick and incurred debt and so forth and so on. At the very least, we may be able to feed them. But we need a sense of that number. You just mentioned 400,000. I don't know how accurate is it, maybe double counting, I don't know. But somehow or another, we need to estimate as closely as possible the number of people who would require some sort of relief in an interim period, because we are not going to emerge from this and go straight back to work as if things were normal. This has never happened before. And so there's going to be that period where we'll have to find our feet again. And the people who would find it most difficult finding their feet are likely to be in the informal sector. For the formal sector, there are businesses that have loans outstanding. I don't know what the government has put in place to handle that, whether to work with the bank, association bankers, kind of defer payment for, I don't know, 2 or 3 months, 6 months. Some of the relief doesn't even have to be cash. Some of it is just to create a breathing space for the businesses for them to emerge, to thrive again. And so it will have to be a multiple front approach, depending on the kind of businesses that we are dealing with or depending on the kind of sector that we are working with.
So talking about the kind of things we're dealing with, so the World Bank has talked about how it would be important for African countries to take a second look at the lockdowns that we have. So partial lockdown, we're talking about essential service providers. The World Bank says, and I mean, you've alluded to the fact that our informal sector is very large. They say African economies just can't support the informal sector with the kind of lockdown we're practicing. It's about time we began taking a second look at how we're practicing or imposing lockdowns in the continent, particularly Ghana.
Yes, but what we've done is that we've imposed, there's one thing to impose a lockdown. It's another thing to enforce the protocols that go with the lockdowns. And it's clear from what we're seeing is that not all the protocols have been observed. I went to one of the markets to replenish my fruit stock, and I was shocked by what I saw. That it was as if nothing actually occurred. People were selling anyhow. There were no attempts. Only just a handful of people were actually wearing face masks. So this is an area that clearly we have to deal with. And the central government can only do so much. Here, we will have to involve the local government, the district assemblies, for them to enforce these things. Again, as I keep saying, and we've been told time and time again that even though the N95 is the best face mask, any kind of cloth that you fold 2-3 times, it's better than nothing at all. So, and we already have market associations. We already have transport taxi associations, trotro associations, GPRTUs. We should be using them, one, to educate and then enforce the safety protocols. From what I've seen so far, there's not enough. Yes, we have a lockdown, but the safety protocols are not being enforced. And until we are able to enforce that, we cannot gradually reopen the economy and manage the risk. Because managing the risk means complying with the minimum of the safety protocols. No one is doing that from what I saw at the market I went there. No one was washing their hands. I mean, it was nothing. And I said, wait, but this is supposed to be a lockdown. So of course, I had my mask and everything on. I quickly bought my fruits and I left.
It might depend on the market you went to, Dr. Thompson, because the Medina market was closed. I mean, it's been closed down. Ashaman market is closed down. CMB market was closed. We're told it's going to be reopened tomorrow. So markets have been closed by local government authorities for not adhering to social distancing protocols and what have you. So clearly, there are some of the markets that are no longer functional, that are no longer opened as a result of not adhering to some of these measures. Isn't that enough enforcement?
No, but the question is the closure the solution? Because when you close it completely also, you are starving people. So rather than closure, I don't know exactly what measures we're taking. I'm a strong believer that if we empower the district assemblies for them to in turn work with the market, because the market associations have presidents, they have officers who are highly respected. If you go to some of these markets, they have Rodehema, they have Ntozihema, they have Banchihema, and all the, and these are very influential people. So you engage them first. That we are going to be talking to you, because again, there's some degree of skepticism within the public that because they haven't seen dead people out there, they think this is all a joke really, and that the government doesn't know what it's doing. You need someone to educate them that it is ultimately in their own self-interest to even observe these things. I'm not sure that all these measures were put into place. We probably just went and imposed a lockdown without letting them understand. But if they do understand on their own, I'm pretty sure to a large extent they will comply using the existing association. So in the case of taxis, you talk, because I'm seeing that every taxi rank has an association. You engage the association members, either Victoria's bucket or hand sanitizer or something, in addition to having some sort of cloth as face. That can easily be done. When I ordered some food and they showed up at my gate, I just didn't go there. I took a tank towel and tied it in front of my face and then went and collected it. And even after I collected it, I put it in a separate room. We cleaned it. I washed my hands and everything. Eventually, I took a shower and all that. But that's that kind of. But it wasn't like
from what you're saying, just by way of clarification, you're saying that we can actually have a lockdown, but enforcement should be left to many of these associations, or should be left to community leaders. When it gets to the market queens can do so. When we get to the taxi stations, the station masters can actually help enforce these protocols. Is that what you're saying?
It's not just have a lockdown. I'm saying that we should ease, as we ease the lockdown. Of course, initially we should have involved them. I don't know the extent to which we involved them, but we need to if we did it. And they should be part of any government decision to ease the lockdown, because we cannot hide from the virus forever. At some point, we're going to have to show our faces and then manage the risk as opposed to hiding from it. But then how do we manage it? This is where the public education comes in. A lot of the radio stations, we need to mobilize, and the PSAs and whatnot, let them also come on board. Now every market woman I know has at least a duku or headscarf that they can use. We just do little videos and show it to them. This will all require major behavioral changes to move through that transition period. Because again, as I said, I don't believe that we can end the lockdown one day and then go straight back to work. No, there will have to be a transition period that gradually takes into consideration this modification of behavior. Of course, for the first time in decades, some of the markets were fumigated for the first time. For the first time, some people are actually washing their hands. People go to the bathroom or whoever. So there's a good part of it where we are developing these habits, these positive habits, but they need to be entrenched. And one way of doing that is to engage those who operate in the informal sector. And they are there. They are very influential if you engage the market. I grew up in the market in Kumasi, and so I know how influential that these market queens can be.
Okay. We'll come back shortly and continue the conversation, because then we'll look at, the World Bank's admonition in detail. We'll find out what it is that we can do differently, what we are not doing right. But we should actually even listen to the admonition by the World Bank that we should be looking at, different ways of ensuring our lockdown. This is Upfront. I'm Winston. Our guest is Dr. Nimoy Thompson, an economist and former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. Earlier you heard from Janisha Patel, all the way from Cape Town in South Africa. We'll be right back after this break. All right, so welcome back from that short break, and thank you very much for staying with us. This is Upfront, and our focus today is on, achieving a lockdown that works for Africa. Now, the World Bank says that Africa should not be going the European way in locking down its economies. The World Bank believes that, African economies are very unique and totally different from the European economies, particularly as a result of, the informal sector. So this evening we have Dr. Nimoy Thompson, an economist and former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission, who's joined us. So we're getting back to Dr. Nimoy Thompson to continue with that conversation. And so Dr. Nimoy Thompson, I'd ask you a very simple one, and it's straightforward. So the World Bank says we should not go the European way. Now, what we have currently is a partial lockdown, as we have seen in other countries in the West, that says, okay, so don't go out. You could go out for essentials like medicine or drugs. You could go out for food. If you're an essential worker, you could, go out there. And all other sectors closed. And so my baba now doesn't work. I have to be my own baba. My mechanic wouldn't work. I have to, park my vehicle if it gets damaged. Now, should we be looking at, reversing these to allow some of these persons also to work?
Yes, as I said earlier, we will have to begin to ease the lockdown to cover just about everyone that you mentioned plus more. But we can't simply ease the lockdown back to our old ways. We will necessarily have to do that within the context of enforcing the safety protocols that came with the lockdown. So far, we haven't done that. It's in some respects. We have failed in enforcing it. And the whole idea of the lockdown is that everybody who must stay home or who should stay home stays home, and therefore the virus is less likely to spread. But that's not what we've seen. We've seen people out there. I saw the one for Marseille, was it yesterday or the day before, and then the one for Circle and a few other places. Clearly, there's been a breakdown. I went to the market myself. So imagine if there's someone, just one person in these crowds, who had the virus, who then infects 10 people, each of whom then infects 2 or 3, and then it begins to go on. So lockdown by itself would not achieve the aim of containing the virus. We'll have to observe the safety protocols. At the same time, we cannot remain in lockdown mode forever. Because this is also a global problem. No country can solve this problem in isolation, such that even if we reduce infections to 0, we cannot celebrate, because we still have to travel. We still have neighbors to deal with. And the economy cannot return to full production mode unless we open our borders, because people have to come in, people have to leave. What kind of situation exists in their countries will, to a very large extent, also inform our own welfare. So as we work on our own lockdown in Ghana, I don't know the extent to which we have engaged ECOWAS, and for that matter, the AU in this. But ultimately, it even goes beyond ECOWAS and the AU. This is a global problem requiring global solution. But each solution obviously needs to take into consideration its own peculiar local circumstances. It's clear in our case. In the case of Canada, for example, was it last week or so, they just sat home and the government billed them checks. So everybody received a check. Okay. What is the situation in Ghana?
Tell me, what's the situation in Ghana? Naming, tell me, Dr. Thompson.
Street naming. I'm sorry?
You're asking a question. What's the situation in Ghana? And I'm, asking you to tell me what the situation in Ghana is.
The street naming, started with street naming and house numbering. How far did we go with that? Even the few streets that were named, the quality of the material they used was so poor that they have all faded. Some of the house numbers have faded. I know a lot in the estate where I live have faded, and no one is being held responsible. So in a sense, the deficiencies and the wicked ways of the past, because these individuals who bought these cheap materials knew that it wouldn't last. But no one held them responsible for that. So precisely at a time when perhaps we need to have good street names and good house numbers, we don't have them. In countries that have good street names, house numbers, everything is delivered to their home. They don't have the kind of chaos that we are seeing in our country now. So it's also a wake-up call when this whole thing is over, that we need to review, in fact, what we mean by development in this country. The president said what? Free water for 3 months, I believe? 3 months?
Yes, 3 months.
But only 27% of households in Ghana actually have piped water. 27%. The vast majority of households, almost 40%, get their drinking water from sachet water.
Sure. So talking about easing the lockdown. So you've said we should ease the lockdown, but also adhere to safety protocols. So let's look at it and let's practicalize it here. Let's practicalize it here. So we're looking at a situation, and I started by talking about the fact that my baba now is on lockdown. He can't come to work. You have a situation where, the mechanics, like we'd call them here, are also not working. And so if you have your vehicle getting damaged as a result. In easing the lockdown, for instance, and adhering to, the safety protocols, how do we go about it? Do we, for instance, ask that certain sectors, certain persons within the informal sector or certain subsectors within the informal sector be allowed to work, or what?
Yes, the first step towards easing the lockdown is to set up a team. The government needs to set up a team made up of the private sector and, of course, the government sector and civil society organizations, if you will, with representatives from the various business associations. We have all of them. And then they operationalize it. They address precisely the kinds of questions that you're raising. Which professions, which occupations should begin the easing first? Because you also don't want to keep others out of out of business for too long, but it may be necessary for us to keep some at home for now and begin to ease gradually. Those are fine details that can be worked on by a special team with enough information, with enough capacity to then educate and enforce. We cannot ease without enforcing the safety protocols. Then it will be something completely different. But then too, we cannot hide forever from the virus. So there needs to be a middle ground.
Well, but the fear all the time, Dr. Nimoy Thompson, is the fact that whenever we set committees, they never get their work done in time. So we're setting up a committee. What sort of consultations are they going to have? How long will that consultation take? So that, we are in times where people would say that people would prefer the lottery of infection than starvation, because if I go out and I get infected, at least I know I'm going to get something to eat rather than staying at home and starving to death.
Yes. I disagree with you that we set up committees, then they don't work. For the most part, they do work. It depends on the kind of mandate, the terms of reference they're given, and how the person who sets up the committee, in this case, the president, monitors them. If the president gives them a mandate with the terms of reference, go out there and give me a roadmap, because we have to come up with a roadmap for restoring some semblance of normalcy. They should be able to work. And as long as it's a committee or a team, if you don't like the term committee, a team, council for reopening the economy, made up of experts and quote-unquote stakeholders from all backgrounds. So we have medical personnel there, we have government officials, we have law enforcement in there, we have market representatives, we have restricted MMDCEs. They all have to determine that this is just a suggestion at the broadest level. But all policy prescriptions must be operationalized, it must be designed. It is in the process of designing them and turning them into a roadmap that we then decide this happens, this doesn't happen, this happens, but under these conditions, and so forth and so on. But you're absolutely right. I cut my own hair for the first time in, 12, 13 years or thereabout. I cut my own hair. We'll have to look, barbers have their own association also. But the enforcement of the protocol is very critical to easing the lockdown. We cannot ease it with the kind of indiscipline that we've seen so far. And that indiscipline can be dealt with. Initially, as I said, but then there are vulnerable groups there. There are people who actually need food. I still strongly believe that let them register themselves. We can easily do the app. We can create the app. We have experts there. And let individuals self-register, self-selection. That will give us a database right there to operate with. Whatever we've done so far is like taking shots in the dark. Nobody knew exactly how many people then were being told that we've fed this man. But if we have self-registration through the telcos, right away we have a database, and then we can begin to manage that database over a given period of time as we ease ourselves back to normalcy. But this is going to be a rough ride. We don't know. I've even seen some numbers for GDP growth, and I'm asking on what basis are they even coming up with GDP growth? Because there are no assumptions discussed. There are no scenarios. What are the assumptions? Are we assuming that the whole crisis will be over by June? What if it lingers until September, the third quarter? or it lingers on for the rest of the year. Each scenario and its own implications for economic growth and the nature of government interventions. We can't just sit here and assume that growth will move from 6.8 to 2.1% on the basis of what?
Well, the finance minister talked about the basis of having an outbreak in Ghana and says if there's a partial lockdown, we're looking at a growth rate of 1.5%. Isn't that?
It may even be, it depends on the scenario and the length, the duration of the crisis. If it takes us towards the third quarter, in all likelihood, we may go into negative growth, which would be the first time since 1983 that we've had negative growth. And it's likely because in all our periods of slowed down economic growth, the informal sector was always there to kind of serve as a shock absorber for the economy. In this case, the informal sector itself is locked down. So we are looking at very marginal to negative growth if this thing goes on to the third quarter. It's highly unlikely that we'll have positive growth. Even if the government somehow comes up with large amounts of money that we then pump into the economy, it will take time. And speaking of large amounts of money, I noticed that we've just received $1 billion from the IMF.
Exactly.
If there ever is a time for us to tackle the issue of corruption and waste, not just talking about corruption now, but there's also waste where you have legitimate expenditures, but they are wasteful. If there's a time for us to tackle these two, this is it. Because if it turns out that we have a one-chain-Z phenomenon, a spectacle, and the money ends up enriching some individuals at the expense of tackling the problem, then things are going to get worse. So we have to be very, very clear. We have to be very transparent. We have to cut a lot of waste. All those ministries that we created that we don't need to be folded up. The National Development Planning Commission, for example, is responsible for development planning and also monitoring and evaluation. So why do we have two separate ministries?
So are you suggesting that we around this time we collapse the monitoring and evaluation ministry and the planning ministry?
I'm giving you an example of redundant ministries. Ministries that we don't need. Okay. Because we have a National Commission for Planning. Let whoever set it up answer that question. Why then do we need a ministry for planning when you have a National Development Planning Commission, which also handles monitoring and evaluation? Why do you need a ministry for evaluation? Why do you need a ministry for business development? We already have a ministry responsible for that. In any case, business development is a multi-sectoral effort and not a single ministry's responsibility, involving so many things, the rental regime, ICT, but so many things. So we have to sit down with a list. This is what happens in other countries. Whenever you run into a crisis, the first thing you do is to draw up a list of expenditure cuts. And in this case, we have very good candidates, prime candidates for expenditure cuts, because a lot of these ministries shouldn't have come up in the first place. And this is a time where, look, we have to run to the IMF for $1 billion. Fine. But we need to spend it in a transparent and efficient way, and also cut out waste. I'll give you an example. When I was in office, and there was a mid-level official of one of the tertiary institutions who wanted a house, an official accommodation, and he wanted a 10-bedroom house.
10-bedroom house?
And not just 10 bedrooms. 10-bedroom house, yes. 3 bedrooms for boys' quarters and 7 bedrooms for the main house. And not just that. He specifically wanted a marble floor for the entire house. And not just that, he also wanted bathrooms in each bedroom. And not just that, in addition to the master bedroom, he also wanted something called a mistress bedroom. I'm not kidding you. This actually happened. So my question to him, this was 2015. My question to him was, partner, don't you have any conscience for you to come and sit here asking for a 10-bedroom house with marble floors and bathrooms everywhere? And his response was that, well, that's what his colleagues in other universities were getting, and so he thought he was entitled to that. Meanwhile, this particular university was in the news for not having even enough lecture halls. The students were standing in the hallways. So clearly his action was not one that would qualify as corrupt. it was legitimate, but it was wasteful. So we fight corruption, we fight waste, and the little money we get should be able to carry us very far. Unless we do that, the amount of money that IMF will give us, $5 billion, $10 billion, it will simply enrich a few individuals.
So
the economy will.
Now, when you talk about unless we can pump in large money, but I'll get to the large money part. You made a point that if it should extend to the third quarter of the year, then it's likely we would grow, would experience a negative growth rate. Is that what you're saying?
Most likely, yes. Most likely. Because again, as I said, the informal sector that usually prevail, like 2015, I think we're 2.3 or thereabout.
Yeah.
So just over 2%. And that with the informal sector still there to hold us. It always saves us from a hard fall.
Okay.
Now that informal sector itself is locked down. The formal sector is on the growth.
Okay. And you also say that around this time we should be looking at expenditure cuts, and so we probably the ministry that we do not need, we should just take advantage of it and scrap these ministries off, such as planning, monitoring and evaluation, business development, so at least we can save a bit of funds for the country.
Not just ministries, but we should also begin to ask very difficult but necessary questions of ourselves in terms of our expenditure, even our taste. Look, you know that V8 is manufactured in Japan, right?
Sure.
But Japanese officials do not use V8. Which officials use V8? African government officials. It's expensive in terms of the cost. It's expensive to run in terms of fuel consumption. You even have ministers or people who are assigned, and not just government officials, but even non-government officials, people who work with state-owned enterprises like Cocoa Board or GNPC or any of the SOEs. We need to cut out this waste completely.
Okay. Well,
where people who do this and don't even use that. There are ministers who use VA, they'll go to lunch and have the driver sit in the VA with the air conditioning running for 2 hours. This is a poor country.
All right,
so
Dr. Nimoy Thompson.
These wasteful expenditures as a way of billing us to make us, to ensure that the money we get will take us very far in reviving the economy.
Dr. Nimoy Thompson, thank you so much for joining us. We're grateful you make time to speak to us. We're very grateful to you. So that's Dr. Nimoy Thompson, who is an economist and former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. That'll be all from us on Upfront. My name is Winston Amwa. Do enjoy your day. Bye for now.